I'm from a little place called Kilmuckridge, which is it's a very picturesque little place. It's about a mile and a half from the beach in North Wexford, and to say that it's a hurling mad part of the country probably would be doing it an injustice. I mean, it's an incredibly passionate area about its hurling. You only have to ask anybody else in Wexford about that. So being brought up in that kind of an environment, hurling was always going to be my game. And I also kind of, I suppose I would have, my earliest memory would have been, I remember, and this sounds crazy, but I was only about 5 years of age and I was pucking a ball. My grandfather was a blacksmith and I was pucking a ball up against the forge wall, and there were cars coming down and they all let down the window and they shouted Buffers Alley won the county final. And that was, I think it was 1970. And I didn't really, as a small little fella, I suppose I didn't realize the significance of this, but it also was the same day, would you believe, that my idols were playing, as you all, or as everyone knows now, Tony Doran was one of my idols. But during the course of the game, just before half time that day, I wouldn't have obviously remembered it, but Tony's father passed away at the match. And the Dorans appreciated. I think they were aware that he wasn't well, but the club, Buffers Alley, had a meeting in the dressing room to decide as to whether they would go out for the second half, but they did. And I suppose that, to a certain extent, when I learned of the true story of what happened that day, and I was pucking the ball around because my father was so fanatical, it showed me a resolve within my own people, within my own club, how important hurling was, and how sad, and how you can mix the sad with the happy. And I just thought it was so, I suppose it was such a tribute to those men that they could be strong enough to go out and do that under the circumstances they did, and obviously with the trauma and the grief they would have encountered. So that was my first real memory, and sometimes I often wonder did I imagine that, but I obviously didn't know anything about the death on the day, but I knew it was Buffers Alley's second county final. I was very young, and I think the first game that I ever attended, the first Buffers Alley game I ever attended, was the 1971 Leinster Club final. Again, I was only 6 or 7 years of age, and I remember my father, who trained the teams that time. We drove to Dublin, and Mick Butler, who was another one of my idols, Mick played corner forward for Wexford. I remember sitting in the middle between my father and Mick in the front seat. There was no helter safety around that time driving, even though there was nobody in the back. And we headed to Croke Park that day, and I think Buffers Alley were beaten by St. Ryan's in a very fractious game. I think the game was lucky to finish, but they were my earliest memories of hurling. I suppose my father was really the most incredible fanatical influence. He was such a lovely man, but he was an absolute fanatical hurling man. And I was an only son. I had three sisters, two of them probably not into hurling, and sadly Magella, who was into it, she passed away there a couple of years ago. But my father, I was the only son, so I suppose I was the great white hope of the family. Of somebody that might make something of myself. And my everlasting memory when I was underage was I'd be playing for maybe Buffers Alley in under 12 or whatever. And my father he always wore a cap, always wore a coat. He always had a fag hanging off the lip. And he'd be looking at the match with two hurls under his arm. And generally the two hurls are my two hurls. And really, looking back now, sometimes you don't get a chance to say this to people, but he just meant so much to me. And maybe I never really thanked him enough kind of about it. But a funny incident happened one day. He used to get a little bit excited, but I was going through in an under 12 county final, and I took a shot, and the ball went wide, and he opened his mouth to give out or to say, "What are you doing?" or whatever, and he swallowed a cigarette. And I remember looking to the sideline, and he was down on his hands and knees, but I ran out because I didn't know, but he was having a heart attack or something. But I remember Joe Doran, one of the famous Doran, said, "Go back in, Tom. He's all right. He's only after swallowing a cigarette." And, it was just, again, it probably sums up the passion for hurling in Buffers Alley. I was so lucky to have the influences I had, really, as I went through. People like, that might mean nothing to other people, but they mean everything to me. The Billy Lees of this world, John Doyle, he was an incredible influence in Buffers Alley. He organised the building of the pitch. He was so forward thinking, and a great man. The likes of Sil Murphy, Fintan Farrell, who was just fantastic people. And then I suppose one of our trainers, Father Jim Butler, who would have guided me, and Father Casey would have guided me through St. Peter's College, and another man who would be known to great hurling people around. He was I think he was either Waterford or Kilkenny man, but Ned Power. Ned was a fabulous coach, and he coached me all through the St. Peter's years. And these were people that were so selfless in their time. And I know I'm forgetting somebody. I could be mentioning another 100 people. I would have come across people all through. Michael O'Grady. We'd probably go into Liam Griffin a little bit later. People like that, and they were just fantastic. And I suppose that everyone that just gave me a lift. I remember John Doyle used to give me a lift when I was a little fella. He used to laugh. John used to say that I was about 7, playing under 14 maybe, but he used to line us up out in a dressing room. And John's, when he'd go to pick the team, he'd pull the lads out of the line, but he'd go to pick and I'd be in the first man in the line, and then he'd go by me. And when he'd go to pick again, I'd be the 8th man in the line in front of him. And then when he'd go to pick again, I'd be the 5th. So I just loved it. And I just have such great childhood memories in Buffers Alley and in St. Peter's College, really, from a hurling point of view. I think when I speak about Tony, I speak about the 1976-77 Wexford team had a huge influence on our lives because it was captained by Tony, obviously, and sadly we didn't get over the line to win the All Irelands that years. But we were very lucky in Buffers Alley in that we had 5 people in the panel. We had Paddy Kavanagh, we had Father Martin Casey, we had Colm Dorn, fantastic player, Mick Butler, Tony Dorn, and Henry Butler. And we were so lucky in that we were living amongst our heroes. And what do you say about Tony Dorn? Because I remember as a kid, if you walk down along the field, side of the field, your determination went from 50% up to 150% because Tony was walking down. I mean, you have people in different clubs. You have Clynes, Christy Ring, you have Rathnewer's Nicky Rackard, you have these icons, and Tony Dorn is the icon. I mean, I can't think of anything more exciting than a high ball being poked into a square, Tony putting up the hand and turning around and putting it into the net. And the anticipation used to build up, the hairs would stand on the back of your neck as the ball was going through. But I think where the influence really came was that, say, the night before an All Ireland final, we would get the old tuppence. And myself, and friends of mine, Aidan O'Connor, Johnny Dempsey, Matty Foley, Shamey Farrell, we'd go down and we'd crowd into the local phone box, get the tuppence, and you'd get maybe 20 minutes or half an hour, we'd be pouring it, and we'd ring Tony the night before the game, before an All Ireland final. And he'd chat to us, or it could be Mick Butler, they'd chat to us then for an hour and a half as we'd tell him the way we felt the game should be played the next day. And I just think you couldn't imagine that happening with the modern day, with the modern day player. It just doesn't happen. But they gave their time and he'd chat happily away, and you could be 2 hours on, and we might even ring him then maybe the Monday night afterwards to tell him where he went wrong, or to where, and it was such a thrill. It just, he was such an icon that time, and everyone just looked up to him. And when I was lucky again that I got to play with him as well, for a period of my career. And he was tetchy enough on the field now if you weren't doing what you were supposed to be doing, but just for the thrill. My father was a huge admirer of his, and then for me to play on the same field as him, I missed playing intercounty by about, I'd say, probably 12 months, which would have been a nice honour as well. But I must say that a lot of my dreams were realised playing with Tony and Mick Butler and guys like that. But just to give you an idea, my mother used to hang the jerseys out on the line. She used to wash the Buffers Alley jerseys. She got all the good jobs, even though she wasn't interested. But I remember one day there was a van pulled up with 5 big men got out of it, and I think they were from Laois or something. But they must have been looking in at the jersey. We thought they were coming in to rob us or something. They were tough looking men. But they went out and asked her could they have the wear of the 14 jersey. Could they just put it on? So there was no cameras that time or phone that you could take a photo. They put on the jersey on them, the 5 of them, handed to the next one, handed to the next one, said thanks to my mother, and hopped into the van and drove away. And I can only imagine in that, look, we wore the orange jersey, they wore the orange jersey. Sure, I got to play with Dorn. What more could you ask for? I got to play with some of my greatest heroes, really, and he was the one, along with Mick Butler, along with Father Casey, along with Henry Butler. These guys were just icons to us. And in an environment like that, Soccer, we were probably reasonably good at soccer. We were okay at Gaelic football, but just there had to be just one game being brought up in that environment. I suppose I could go very, very far back to I played Gaelic football for Wexford when I was 11, under 14, and I would have played football and hurling for Wexford all up through the grades. But I suppose the first big day for me was 1981. I was under 16 in the Leinster final against Kilkenny, and it's a horrific regret to me because we had a magnificent team, and we played Kilkenny in the Leinster final, and as happens so often, we got a bad break with a line ball, which lost the game on us. But I always remembered I was kind of called into the team out of the blue and totally naive. I played on a Kilkenny cornerback. I can't give the name again, but early in the game I scored a goal because Wexford were playing the Leinster final, senior final that day, and it was a huge Wexford crowd. And I remember scoring the goal and then being almost paralysed by this roar. I've never heard anything like this before. And I got so ahead of myself that the next ball I got, I threw it over the Kilkenny fella's head, which is something you don't do in hurling really. And the next ball that came in, I remember I got about 6 or 7 stitches. I had to go off right down across my, and I don't blame anyone for that because it's not something I ever liked in the game that somebody throw the ball overhead. But a funny thing happened then after that, and not to talk about Tony Dorn all day, but I was coming up from getting stitched after the minor match, and the parade was going around for the senior final. We had great hopes in the 81 senior final. Tony was captain, and he winked at me, and I winked back. And I remember within 10, 15 minutes, Tony was being carried off himself. He'd got an awful bang. And I couldn't be, I was only 16, I couldn't be consoled that I was after giving him the nod of death. I shouldn't have winked at him because I gave him bad luck for that day. But I remember the two of us ended up in hospital together that day, and wasn't a good day for Wexford. But again, it's a memory that probably I won't forget, in a long time. But that was my first day. And then first day senior, I played against Laois. And it was a great day, a great Laois team. John Taylor, Pat Critchley, the Bohans, fabulous. And they actually beat us in the Leinster final in 85. I did well that day. I think I got 1-3 or 1-4 that day. Hurled very, very well, but our championship ended up pretty quickly. But again, I was playing the game that time the way I should have probably played it all my life without any restraints or without any worries, And if I'm ever giving advice to people, get out there and just play. I played with some great players. Larry O'Gorman was a fella that I always felt went out, nothing got into his head. He just went out and he enjoyed the game. Gascoigne in soccer, very same. Just get out and enjoy the game. And if there was any little regret, I probably wouldn't have got as uptight about games really. Well, my first visit to Croke Park was as that 6-year-old for the Leinster club final with Buffers Alley, and but my next day, would you believe, in Croke Park in the big smoke, I was always a great Dublin football fan. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a better Wexford football fan, but I loved the Dubs of the 70s. I loved Tony Hanaho. I loved Anton O'Toole, Brian Mullins. Oh, God, I love these guys. Bobby Doyle, Paddy Cullen, Sean Doherty. I just loved them. So after a lot of nagging as a 9-year-old, my dad brought me to Croke Park. And that time he didn't have a ticket for me, but the 74 All Ireland. And it was the rebirth of the hill as well. And I always remember looking down at the hill with absolute and utter amazement. And we were in the top deck of the Cusick stand, and I was sitting kind of almost on my father's knee with a man called Larry Fitzpatrick, a friend of his, and we were looking down at the game, and I was just in awe of this place, of the history. There was, as I sat in, I said, "There's something about this place that's just not normal. It's incredible." And again, it was all building up in me. I was saying to myself, "Look, I have to play here sometime. I want to play." I was then cutting lumps, whether football or hurling, off my mother's roses and driving her mad, and I had to be playing in Croke Park. You felt very, very honored and very, very privileged. But the funny thing is, and I don't know if any other players would have felt this way, but it was only after that it was all over that I look back now and say, my God, did I actually stand in the middle of that place? Did I actually get a goal in Croke Park on the biggest day of the year? With what, maybe 30, 35,000 Kilkenny or Wexford people looking at me. Kilkenny people looked at me a good bit as well, sadly. But and I just felt that I think part of it as well was the pride that my father, my mother, my sisters, your club, and I always feel that when you run out on a field in Croke Park, there's certainly no doubt that your club jersey is somewhere just under your inter-county jersey, because you don't represent yourself, you represent a parish, you represent a county, but in the real kind of thing of what you do is you're representing your community, and that's always probably been the most foremost thing in my mind when I go out there. And you come out sometimes even after winning an All Ireland, and everyone is shaking hands with you, tapping back on the back and whatever, but I was never happy. I remember there was two old men, shouldn't be saying old now, but they're sadly passed away now, Billy Lee and Sil Murphy, and they used to sit at the corner of the bar in Buffer's Alley. And no matter what happened in the game that day, if I scored a goal or two goals or went well, I was never comfortable or happy with my performance unless I was back and the boys said you did well today. The two boys in the car, and they were my own people, and they never said you didn't do well. But I always wanted to get back to the two. They were always there. They'd always have two whiskies in their hand, and I'd go up and I'd just say well, and the two boys would say you did well today. Or if you were beaten or you didn't, it didn't go for you, but you know what, they'd always leave you. And people like that, and it's very sad that people like that are not around, and I know, they'll never be replaced for me, really. I would have spanned, I think, two different eras really. In that, I remember in '89, say I started hurling with Wexford in '85 in the '89 club final, and the difference in preparation maybe for that compared to the '96 All Ireland. I think that maybe Gerlach Nan, Liam Griffin, they changed the actual preparation. Everything was kind of hydration. It just changed completely, and even the preparation for that. Um, I always remember that we never stayed overnight. Whether it be with club, I played in two All Ireland club finals, or with county, because we were fairly well in close proximity to Dublin. And I personally, I don't like kind of not sleeping in my own bed the night before. It's hard enough to sleep in your own bed, let alone go up to Croke Park or to Dublin to sleep, the big smoke, because the Dublin in my early days seemed like an awful long way away, kind of as such. You're nearly homesick by the time you get up there. But I remember the difference, say in '89. I remember Buffers Alley played in the All Ireland club final, and this was so big for us. I don't think we had a huge amount of mental preparation. We were just going up and taking things as they were. But I remember we had sandwiches, which was a big thing for us that time, planned in the Tara Towers hotel on the way into Dublin that day. But I always remember that about 300 from the parish arrived there before us. And before we got to the sandwiches were all gone. The supporters were after eating them on us. So, and I remember that everything was much easier that time. And I have to say, it wasn't any less pressure, because you knew how important this was. You were going up to an All Ireland club final. This little parish, this little seaside town with Munamulin up and Buffers Alley, and the next minute you're kind of representing and trying to bring them from the day you were coached first in a field of how to hit the ball to being the best club team in Ireland. So the stakes were high, but there was a much different preparation. We would have driven up to the game. I remember we parked over in Clonliffe. We walked across amongst the supporters with we just thought we were thrilled. We had new green jumpers. Now they look like nothing on this earth when I look back at it, but they were the trendiest thing in a tie we had, and the yellow trousers. I mean, I don't know whether green and yellow go well on in the natural, but we walked across there, and then we were into the old dressing rooms in Croke Park, and where the beam went across in the Cusick stand there. But it was a much different build up when we were with Liam Griffin for the Wexford. Then, not 7 years later, went up on a coach. Our girlfriends, our wives were in the coach behind us, stopped in the Stillorgan Park. You didn't see the supporters or whatever. Then we went in, our psychologist, Neve Fitzpatrick, took us down through the visualization that we'd been using. We went down through the traffic lights thing that Liam Griffin had said to us, that we're on amber. We're on red when we're in the dressing room, we're on amber on the pitch, and then we're on green about 2 minutes before the game. So everything was so planned. And I remember driving in the Croke Park, and just the hordes of Wexford supporters and Limerick supporters at the two sides of the bus. And I have to be honest with you, you would be pretty nervous kind of going in and whatever. And I remember going to a Leinster final. Shawnee Flood, who was just a great friend of mine, Shawnee's father, Tim, played in the All Irelands in the 50s, a legend in Wexford. But I remember Shawnee used to sit down, I used to sit beside him, and he just looked out at the side of the bus and he looks up at me and he said, why do we put ourselves through this? It's sometimes it's not all that it's made up to be, because that sometimes you'll be remembered forevermore. One little mistake or one miss free or whatever. But at the same time, I wouldn't change it for the world, and I know Sean, you wouldn't change it for the world as well. But you're going in there, and there's an incredible excitement, and you're entering Croke Park, and as I say, you're entering the Mecca. For me, it's the Mecca. This is God, if I was to have my ashes spread somewhere, I'd like it to be spread in Croke Park, because it just is where you've always wanted to be. But there is a certain amount of pressure comes there, and I think there was more preparation and thought put into it, maybe from '89 to '96. But I tell you, it's a daunting place when things are going badly, and it's the most wonderful place in the world when things are going well. My memory obviously goes back to '96, because the Leinster final that year was probably one of the best games that Wexford have ever played in the All Ireland final. But Liam Griffin was very, very meticulous. Like, I mean, he would have everything right. He'd have a different angle on everything. And you go into a dressing room, and I know some of them, the Davy Fitz dressing room is very emotionally packed. I know that the Buffers Alley dressing room, when I was in it, we had some great characters, Sean Whelan, Pat Kenny, my late brother-in-law, Barry Murphy. They were very intense, and it was like electric. But Liam Griffin was very adamant that, bear in mind that I was only ever hurled in one All Ireland senior hurling final, so we didn't have much room to get it wrong. So Liam was very, very much that we keep this at a low key, and we're always in control of our emotions, and that was very, very important, because at times Wexford lost games. In Wexford, it has been our Achilles heel, and yet it's been a great benefit to us. But we work on emotion. We work on Hill 16 being Vinegar Hill. We work on all that. It can be great, but actually it can let you run away with yourself as well. So Liam was very, very, very adamant that we wouldn't let that happen, that we got a mix of that. But I remember, and I think it needs to be said, before the All Ireland final in 1996, probably one of the most striking things that ever happened in the dressing room happened to us that day. And Shawnee Flood, Shawnee, as I say, he was one of the greatest characters, one of the greatest players we ever had. His father, Tim Flood, had played in All Ireland finals. Shawnee was looking forward to his first ever All Ireland, but he got injured in the Galway game before it. And you want the definition of a hard man. You talk about hard men, they'll pull on you, but this is the definition of a hard man. He broke a bone in his shin in the Galway game, and we couldn't bring a sub on. So Shawnee limped up the corner forward and stood there for the last 15 minutes just to make sure we hadn't got 14 players. And although not big in stature, that's toughness for me. But I was very friendly with Shawnee, and Liam Griffin just asked Shawnee that day. It actually before we went to battle as such. He said last words with Shawnee, and Shawnee wasn't expecting this. He wasn't a fella for talking that much, and he just turned around and he looked at us and he said, lads, you never know the opportunity you have in life till it's taken away from you. It was the most striking thing that ever happened for me. And I'm not saying it won the All Ireland final. I'm not saying it did anything else, but it just, for me, in that one moment, summed up the emotion that you can have in a hurling dressing room. And I think Wexford people, despite our lack of success, we have that emotion. We don't need 30 All Irelands. We'd like to have 30 All Irelands, but we have that. And the dressing room that day for me was incredible. And yet we were very much with Liam Griffin. You don't lose the run of yourself, because he's a very calming influence, really. I was slightly different, I suppose, to a lot of the players, in that I probably wasn't the person that was comfortable with the kind of shouting and kind of jumping up and down before you went out. We had in the Wexford dressing room, as I said, in the Buffers Alley dressing room, we had some marvelous characters. As I went back, I said Tony Dorn, you had Mick Butler, you had Henry Butler, Peary Butler, in Craig Colin Dorn, you had Sean Whelan. These guys I would gent Colin Whelan the Donohues, these guys would kill for you, the O'Learys, they would kill for you. And I always remember that I was more kind of, I'd sit in the dressing room and just relax and maybe wouldn't be as, I always remember one time I was made captain of the Buffer Sally team. And this was it was actually the year after the Club All Ireland. And I remember we were going out for a county semi final. And it was at the final against the arch enemy Owler, who are great people, but we had war with them every time Owler to Balloch were on the borders with them. But I remember the lads they were saying, Jeannie, I wonder, Tom is not a kind of a lad that'll drive us on or whatever, but they give it an incredible talk before we went out. And I turned to go out and I said, come on now, lads. And I pulled the handle off the door and I locked the team into the dressing room, would you believe? So, and I remember looking back at these guys and I said, are they going to go through the door and me now or whatever? But we all laughed about it afterwards. But I wasn't that time. And even, you're in a dressing room, George O'Connor, George, just an Iron Man, an Iron Man. I mean, I was so lucky that I came across such icons and I sat in a dressing room with such icons. But George would, I remember running out on the field one day and in Croke Park, and George pulled just above my hand. I put my hand up to steady myself going out, and George pulled about an inch above it, running out because he was so fizzed. Liam Dunn would be so fizzed. Larry O'Gorman would be kind of in the corner telling jokes and whatever. Sean would be telling jokes. Ger Cush was very quiet fella. Colin Keogh, they were quiet. Damien Fitz was, honest to God, you'd nearly take a deck chair out. And pre-Liam Griffin, Martin Story might be having a fag in the small toilet just to kind of cool him down. So we all had different ways of going. I remember again specifically the '96 All Ireland when I was leaving the dressing room, and we were very calm. We walked out in the field because it was 25 minutes to kick off time or the ball being thrown in. I remember walking down through the tunnel, and I just loved this, and I can't remember exactly what was said, but I could hear over the tannoy, ladies and gentlemen, could we have a big southeastern welcome? I don't know who it was saying it, for the men from Wexford. And we were stuck in the tunnel just for a second before they let us out, and you could just hear this roar, just deafening. And we then walked up the steps out onto the field, and you just looked around you. And obviously, there was a big Limerick crowd there, but down towards the hill, I can only equate it to thunder and lightning, that the ground seemed to shake when Wexford came out on the field. And then when you look down, the purple and gold, they're visually lovely colours, and it almost was like lightning. And you get out on the field, and it's just an incredible feeling. And for that, to be honest with you, for that 10 seconds, 15 seconds, you're almost out of control. You don't have any control over here. You'll notice fellas will run their best. If there was somebody in your way, you could run over them, because you're out of control. And I always remember then we did the thing around the field, or the parade around the field, and everywhere you went. And then as you go along, I probably shouldn't have been noticing this, but you'd notice that the crowd would start to lift in the corner of the Hogan stand. Then the crowd would start to lift on the canal end, and they just lift. And it was kind of like a slow Mexican wave going around the pitch. And then you go to Hill 16, and the place kind of just goes crazy down there. And then the last thing I remember for the All Ireland final, you see, it was my first time in an All Ireland final, so I had nothing to benchmark against this. I really, Niamh Fitzpatrick was brilliant, but I had nothing to say what was going to happen or how I was going to feel. I remember going down, I was playing corner forward, so I was 10 yards from the hill where the Wexford fans, and I don't know what the hill held that time, but it probably held 12, probably played 16, 18,000. So as I ran down to the hill, I was on Declan Nash, who was a fabulous hurler from Limerick, and the next minute the hill just lifted. And I always remember the wall of sound about 10 yards away from me. And I just said to myself, oh my God. And I turned, I'm probably admitting too much here, but I turned, put my back to it, and just controlled myself, practiced my deep breathing and whatever. And it's quite an experience. Probably if I was like Henry Shefflin now and was there 12 or 13 times, I'd be getting used to that. But it was, and I thought it was I thought it was a great reflection on all our backroom team, that they had us prepared for all this, in something we had never done before. But I just cannot give you the excitement of going out on Croke Park. It's all your dreams come true. Leinster semi-final came, and we suffered a bereavement in the family. My brother-in-law was killed just before the Dublin games. So it was a funny year in that the emotion didn't hit me as much. I was kind of I was riding somewhere about 10 yards above where everybody else seemed to be in Wexford. So I wasn't overly affected by the emotion of the thing, because I suppose there are bigger things in life and we all know that. But for me, the Leinster final in 1996 was the real turning point, because Offaly, more so than Kilkenny, had become our bogey team. You know, they were the ones, we'd beat Kilkenny and the next minute Offaly had come, and they had just a fantastic team, a team I really admire. So that was the real killer for us. So we came to the Leinster final, and the famous, it's talked about a lot, but Vincent Hogan had said something in the region, and Vincent is one of my best friends, and he had said on the paper that, questioning the blood in these men's veins, you know, and Wexford, have they got the wherewithal? And I didn't pay much attention to it, but we were going to the Leinster final that day, and just on the border between Wexford and Wicklow, Liam Griffin got us out on the road, and we didn't know what was going on. The cars going by, blowing horn, things like that. And the next minute, he gave probably a 10-minute speech that would put the hair on the back of your neck standing, about the blood, who would dare question the blood in our veins. And it was all to do, and this is what I was saying earlier, that, you know, it's all to do with the Battle of Ross in 1798, and there's nobody's any right to question the blood in our veins. And basically, we were stepping across the border and we weren't coming back till the pride and honour was restored to the county. Now, if that had went wrong, we probably would have been laughed out of the county, but it certainly was another little part of what Liam Griffin was doing, of the thousand things that he did professionally and right to get us right. So we stepped into Wicklow, not totally sure what had happened if we had been beaten that day, but we probably would have had to come back down the Naas dual carriageway, so we wouldn't have had to step back over the border or whatever. But it really was, and this is why the emotive stuff, Wexford are a very emotionally driven team, a momentum driven team. Even the present day team is emotional. That can be good and bad, but if it's properly channeled, it can have great results for Wexford. So we went on to play Offaly. Damien Fitzhenry scored a penalty. Everything, again, we were talking earlier, when things go right in Croke Park, I would have wanted that game to go on for the next 5 hours, because for the last 10 minutes, if somebody had thrown me a ball in Quins, I would have put it over the bar, because I genuinely, if I had been standing in the car park, or down in, I don't know, we would have put it, because we just, once we got to that point of knowing Offaly were gone, and this was 18 years, what, 1977, or 19 years of sheer emotion, a sheer release of a team that had been beaten by a point. We'd say we were robbed or whatever, and then all of a sudden this was opening up. And I think the scenes after that game and the feeling after that game was one of the best I've ever had in my life. But I remember we were due to train on the Wednesday evening, and Liam Griffin brought us in, and he just sat down. And this is why I think he was before his time, but we went in ready to train. I have to be say a bit worse for the weather. We'd been celebrating since Sunday, and he sat down, got us around the pitch. He said, have you enough? And you were talking about 31-year-old George, 36, Martin Storey, 32, Billy Byrne, 36, all John O'Connor, all in our, we should have won something before we did. So he sat us down and he said, right, do you want more, or will we leave it at that? He said. And we said, well, we want more. And he said, I'll tell you what you do then. Go home, have a good night's sleep, and come back and we'll train tomorrow night. And that was it. From then on, I had no doubt. Even though we got a bit of luck against Galway, we got a bit of luck against them. I had no doubt that the gods were with us, that we were going to win the All Ireland that year. The recollections are of a county gone mad. I mean, tractors, cows, anything you could paint purple and gold was painted purple and gold, and people were living the dream. I think one of the great things for us, really, everything fitted into place. I mean, the Wild Swans just came on stream at that stage, and you're dancing at the crossroads. You had purple and gold. We had a great manager. We had a good team. We I don't believe there's any support in Ireland can match Wexford. I think one of the major things that we did was we just embraced it and we just enjoyed it. We went in. There's no doubt that it was nerve wracking and whatever, but the game started, and there was a lot of talk about the Limerick. I thought the Limerick were playing really well, and everybody said, oh, they didn't finish the round, the parade and all that. And I don't think that went against them at all. I don't think it really had a big uh, part of the game at all. But really, there were 5 points to one up, and we were in a bit of bother then at that stage. We slowly, but the goal then, I think there was about 20 minutes gone. And if I'm being really, really honest, Gary Laffin drove the ball in. Larry Murphy contested it, fell on the ground, and I just pulled on it. But probably my ambition was to put it in the top right hand corner, but it went off my hurl into the other side of the goal. And what Joe Quaid was wrong footed by it. And I'd say Joel, I'll tell you that to this day, but he was wrong footed by it, but the ball ended up in the net. So I give myself great credit for being there in the right place at the right time, but maybe not for the quality finish that I'd like to have had. I usually hit balls a bit better than that. But again, once the ball went in the net, I felt an incredible relief because I said, I'm on my game and things are going to go well. And then I felt, I just felt that again, this hill, the noise that was coming off this hill and the absolute, and I just turned around and I said, I'm there. I'm in the frame. It wasn't my best game all year or anything like that, but I just felt I was in the frame. So this was going well. And it takes something, particularly in a low scoring game, bad to happen before things will turn on me here, kind of as such. And I remember going into the dressing room at half time, and there was a little bit of panic in our dressing room. Eamon Scallon had been sent off, and we had practiced. We had been told, look, if we get a man sent off, that two men go, Gary and Tom, you go to the two sides of the full forward line, spread across it, and we everyone pick up the spare man for 5 minutes. Liam Griffin had meticulously prepared for that, so every forward had a turn to pick up the spare man, so he'd prepared for that. Went in at half time. I got a score just before half time to put us a point up, and psychologically, it was nearly more important than the goal because we were always ahead. Went in at half time. There was a little bit of shouting and lads. And I remember talking to Seamus Barron, and Seamus was the selector, Rack Newman, Rory was with us, Rory Kinsler, John O'Leary, Sean Collier. They were brilliant people. And I remember Pat Murphy as well. Pat was our most important man, because if you needed a stud for your boot, Pat was the man that took care of that. Dr. Stephen Bow, they're such great people. Went in, there was a little bit of unrest in the dressing room. And I remember Seamus saying, he was a Ragnor man, we need to just settle down, he says. Go out and let them panic. And he went and said it to Liam. Liam cooled everyone down. And again, we went back onto the field, totally in control of our emotions. And it was the quietest dressing room. There was no passionate breaking the hurl off the table. We just said, lads, look, let's get out there. And I remember Liam Griffin saying, lads, keep to it. If we don't foul, we'll win this game. Went out in the second half. I was on the freeze, which I would never particularly liked the freeze, but I was on the freeze, and I think I got two. Did I? No, I got one free, and there were two frees in the second half. Yeah, and they went over the bar, and it was very, very important. And then I remember time was almost up, and Billy came on, and George came on. George was on from the start. And then you kind of, I used to look up the brother-in-law, and Niall Glynn was the man's name, and I used to always, I shouldn't do it. I was cheating a bit, but I used to look up and say, Niall, if you're up there now, get him to blow his final whistle. And I did that for every game that season. When the game was over, I just stopped, and nothing went through my mind for a second. I just thought, this is just something else. What's after happening? I'm just after achieving with these lads the greatest thing that's ever happened to us. And I was up in the Joe Quaid square in the canal end, and the next minute, everyone just seemed to run the opposite way. So I was left on my own, and then all of a sudden, who was standing in the square beside me? Only Tony Dorn. And he put his arms around me, and it was a great moment for my father, I think, as well, in that, two Buffers Alley men. I'd watched him. Next minute, we end up in the square, and it was really nice. So I brought my father down, and I said to the steward. Steward turned around to me and said, "Tom, do you want to bring him into the dressing room?" And I said, "I would love to." And I don't. I think he didn't know where he was, but I just said that's what differentiates GAA from the ordinary steward. He probably was a fella from Tipperary. I never got a chance to say thanks to him. That mightn't just happen everywhere else. And for my father to be kind of standing in the winning All Ireland dressing room, he played junior himself, very good hurler, but never got to that. But here was Croke Park saying, hold on there now, you get down there and get in there. So it was a memorable day, really was a memorable day, I must say. It was amazing. I remember sheer exhaustion. Colm Keogh from Muttletory, who was just an incredible cornerback. But Colm, about 2 months after the All Ireland final, you see, what's seldom is great, really. And we don't win All Irelands every year like Kilkenny or, teams Cork, Tip or whatever. But Colm said to me, something, Tom, we were in somewhere, we were doing a function. He said, I often thought of what it'd be like to win in All Ireland, but I never dreamed of what it'd be like after. He said, I was never prepared for it. It was the only thing we didn't prepare for, and it was heavy, but it was just fantastic. I remember we got on the bus coming down, and all through Wicklow, where we have a great fan base in Wicklow, and please God, we'll get a chance to support them in football sometime. But coming through Arklow, coming through Rathnew, Newtown, Mount Kennedy, they were just, it was the old road home that time, but it was great. And it was almost like coming through Wexford. And then we arrived in Wexford, and I remember we were at the back of there was a huge stage in Wexford in Gorey. And I just said to somebody, I said, God, there's not that many here. There was probably a couple of hundred people behind the stage. And I thought the front of the stage was the back of the stage. And the next minute they brought us up on the stage, and I just looked up, and there must have been 35,000 people in the first town we went to. And it was just amazing. And then we went on to Camolan, Ferns. We didn't stop there, and in Tenniscarty, the very very same thing. Then on to Wexford, and that was the big celebration where the Wild Swans played, and we were in the old cinema car park, and it was just breathtaking just to see the amount of people and to see the emotion that was there as well. People were just so thrilled. My number one memory, or my number one emotion about GAA is winning the All Ireland club title. I mean, if somebody asked me if you had to give something away, I wouldn't be giving away my All Ireland club medal, because you have to remember we were a little parish. I started playing when I was 6, and we're a small parish. Just hurling was everything, and the GAA pitch, as I say, was about 4 miles away, and my happiest days were in the GAA pitch. So I think it's best explained by when we went into the dressing room after the game. Uh, it was the one with I often see it in old footage with Mick Dunn interviewing people. And, when they were allowed into the dressing room and they were interviewing the Offaly lads or the Fan Larkin or whatever. And we were in that dressing room, and everywhere I looked, it represented everything that was important to me within my club. So I looked in one corner. I remember that I remember actually I was sensible enough to sit back and just think about it. I looked in one corner. You had the Butlers, the Dorns, Father Casey, those guys, the older players who were the ones that formatted everything for us. I looked in another place, and you had the Whelans, incredible men. You had the Gans, Matty Foley, you had the Donahues, the O'Learys, you had Pat Kenny, you had Harley, you had all the fellas that were more my age and I grew up with. And then you looked, and it's in my mind's eye still in the corner, that in another corner they weren't together, but my father was there with the cap, with the fag, with the hurls under the arm. Barry, my brother-in-law, who played cornerback that day, and just we were so shocked. He passed away there a couple of years ago at 59, and he was in that corner. Marnie Burke, who passed away, since Ger Sweeney, who passed away, and it was just so special. This was heaven. This was the day that I'd lived for all my life, and I know the lads had as well. And I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. I probably am. I'm leaving Peary Butler, selector John Doyle, Paddy Sinnott, all these people that were so important. But if I had one wish, it'd be to spend that hour again, just in that dressing room. And I'd probably give a couple of them lads, the lads that are an extra hug. That's all. It was just incredible. And the game itself, we played Donovan Ross in the final. We'd such an incredible club team. We'd won in that 10 years. We'd won 8 senior county titles, 3 Leinster club titles, an All Ireland club title. I think we could have won more. But you know what? You only have to experience something once to know what it's like. And I was just so thrilled, and I was so thrilled to be in that dressing room. But again, just give me another 5 minutes in that dressing room. I have a few more things to say, as the fella says, to a few of those people. I think the two most memorable matches I would have played in were the 1985 Leinster Club final. Uh, we played Kinnity, who had something like 7 of the panel of the Offaly team that won the All Ireland earlier on that summer, and we were no hopers. And again, there's a photo after with all the people, all the Buffers Alley people in it. But For me, probably that was the day that our club played the ultimate game. I think we won by 12 points, but we played a flawless game from Henry Butler in the goal to Sean Whelan wing back right down through the middle. To Tony Dormick Butler in the full forward line, to Tony Dwyer. Tony's no longer with us as well. And I suppose a lot of what I'm thinking back now, Barry Murphy, who I don't haven't said much about, I suppose, but Barry was my brother-in-law, and I played with Barry the whole way along, and he passed away. My sister passed away, and I think 6 months to the day a couple of years ago before Barry, and we had a lead into that, in that she wasn't well, she had cancer, but Barry then really shook the club because it just happened so suddenly, and he was one of those guys that was always there when we were hurling, always walked the walk, and you always felt he was going to be there forever. I didn't have a brother, so to an extent Barry was that, but it really was 85 that everyone was there, and I think we gave a flawless display against Kinnity, and we had to, because you'd Pat Delaney, Jared Coughlin, God, I could the Corrigans, all those guys, they were fantastic, and I just felt that we didn't win the Club All Ireland that year. We were beaten by Kilruan, but I felt that day we were by far the best club team in Ireland. That was one of the days. The Leinster final in '96 against Offaly. Again, if the ball had been in the car park, I'd have put it over the bar, and so would the other way. Martin Storey would have as well. Rory McCarthy would have as well. Larry Murphy. Well, Larry was just outstanding that day. That was another day, and the only game that I think, if I had had a win at the end of it, that I would have said was the most memorable game was probably the '93 Leinster final, where we drew with Kilkenny. We were 4 up with 4 or 5 minutes to go. But the problem is that it's never your most memorable game when you come out, that you don't win it. And in fairness to Kilkenny, what better team? They probably scored the point of the century, uh, from the full back line to equalise. Coolness, teamwork, everything you want from Liam Simpson, Tadrian Ronan, to I think it was Eamon Morrissey finished it, and it epitomised to me what they were, a great team. But if I was to say, that was probably one of the best games of hurling I was ever involved in, the '93 Leinster final. But if I was given a choice to pick one, it'd be the '85 Leinster Club final or the '96 All Leinster hurling final. They were just fantastic games. It's very simple. I just say enjoy, 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 because I think the modern game has taken a little bit of the enjoyment out of it. And maybe I'm wrong because I'm not part of it, but it is gone so serious. When we were young, I remember Larry Murphy, Rory McCarthy, and young Hopper McGrath and myself used to go home from training. And before the seismic change we saw in preparation, we'd stop at the bus stop shop in Enniscorthy after a training session, and we'd get Mars Bar, 99, can of Coke, and a bag of potato, cheese, and onion to replenish yourselves going home. And I know that you can't do that anymore, but that we'd sit eating those outside the shop for half an hour, and I know it's a different time. I know that we wouldn't survive possibly with the present day players, but I just hope the enjoyment doesn't go out of it. And when you're enjoying something, Liam Griffin told us one time, the ideal performance state, one of the biggest parts of that is enjoyment. And I just think, lads, whatever way you can get your mind into that frame, and obviously I can give you the thoughts about practice, and your touch, everything else. My biggest thing was the forge wall at home, where I was hitting the ball up against it, and that's very, very important. And also, I would say to players to think team, don't think. For maybe in my early days, I didn't know any better, but I taught Tom Dempsey more than I taught team. And I think if I was to give any player a bit of advice, young people, they come in very much with thinking themselves, not team, and you won't have a successful team. And even for parents, I would say, think team. If your young fella's in the goal, it's for the team. If he's maybe taken off, and be a little bit kinder with people, because it's an amateur game still. We're getting a lot of enjoyment about it, and that's what I would think. But I don't know if that makes sense, but that's where I keep going back. Enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. On the playing field, there's no doubt the club title in '89, county championships, Leinster clubs, that comes up as number one, and the All Ireland Leinster with Wexford, a couple of Leinsters with Wexford, they are the ultimate playing highlights. But when I look back on GAA, I think my highlights are a little bit deeper than that. First of all, I've my wife is very Sinead. She's from the Kyo clan, 17 Kyos, great camogie players and all that, and we're very very much immersed in GAA. I mean, our lives are GAA. So to see my two daughters go out with a Wexford jersey, to go out with a Glyn jersey, it gives me immense pride. To see my son, he's played under 20, even Wexford minor panels, and he's playing with the Glyn team now, Glyn Barntown team. That gives me huge pride because I know they're getting huge and great enjoyment out of it. But the ultimate highlight overall, I think, is the GA itself, because we would have had, as I say, a few down days in the club, but my brother-in-law, with people passing away. And I just think that any time, we the Barry, my brother-in-law was buried there a couple of years ago. My sister, I've had a few good friends in the club. We've had a few things, in your own family that have been very, very tough. And no matter what happens, there's always the GA guys. If you're down a bit, they'll always put the hand down to pull you back up. And for me, the greatest enemies I had on the field were the ones that put their hands down when things are not good. And for me, that sums up the GAA. And my highlight is that they'll never let you drop too far without trying to pull you back up the GAA, really. And I think that's the highlight for me in the GAA, really. It's not a sporting highlight, but being part of it, being part of that group of people, that huge family, that's my highlight.